Hi, I'm Will Cliff, Head of Elite Sport at Franklyn. Welcome to our Behind the Curtains podcast. Today, I'm joined by Team GB and Olympic BMX rider, Ross Cullen. Ross, thanks for joining us, mate.
No, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to come down and give a little view from behind the scenes and what life is through my eyes.
Mate, so I looked at your list of achievements before we started. I thought, let's see what this guy's been up to. 2011, fourth place finish at the Youth World Champs. 2012, 2015, Youth World Champion. 2018, Youth Olympic Games. Great Britain's flag bearer at the opening ceremony. 2019, crowned European Junior Champion. Winning the national crown same year. First and second in the European Cup. 2020, Tokyo Olympic Games. 2022, third place in the European Cup. 2023, two more European podiums, first place, third place, and obviously your first cycling world champs where you finished 6th overall and the highest GB rider in the men's squad. Mate, you've been busy. You're only 23.
Yeah, I don't feel it. I think the stress and pressure physically, mentally, I think I feel at least 33. But I'm still got plenty of youth in me, and I'm grateful for all the opportunities and results I've had so far. And
how does that feel, mate, when you actually take a step back and you hear me read that list then? How does that feel?
I guess it's kind of normal to me, but it's still like a pinch me moment, especially with the Youth Olympics. That was kind of my first games experience. I know it's not a Summer Olympics, but it was still a huge event. We stayed in the village in Argentina. I was announced a flag bearer, and that was in front of I think over 100,000 people live in Argentina watching. So that was kind of the first pinch me moment I remember. Wow, this is pretty special, and that filled me with a load of fire to continue to be where I am now, going to my second Summer Games.
I guess that's it, isn't it? You talk about things that motivate you or spur you on to really kick on a level, and I was going to ask what moments stuck out for you over that journey, but that was the point, was it, where you were like, right, here we go?
Yeah, I think so. And that year, at the end of that, coming into 2019, is when I had more involvement with British cycling, and in 2019 I actually moved up as a full-time athlete. So I think that was the start of the chain of events that continued to give me more of a taste for it. But I think early on, you mentioned the 2012 World Champs. That was my second World Championships as an 11-year-old lad at home, so my family were there and didn't really have that many expectations, and going and winning. I remember rocking up, I think it was high school, or primary school, on the week after, and I get to call myself a world champion. Like, I absolutely thrived from it. There wasn't many kids that could say that. So I definitely got a taste for winning quite early, which people would say is great, but I think it was also probably my biggest downfall was all I was used to was winning and performing very well.
Fascinating, mate. And obviously, let's rewind 10 days ago. Roughly, we were out playing golf, and you're dead relaxed, you're dead chilled. We get back end of the course, and you're like, oh, announcements out, and you've just been named in the Olympic squad, just like it was, nothing. It's just a text message from a mate, but like to us, we're like, what? And yeah. Mate, why so relaxed? It's just still part of the process, I guess.
Yeah, I think first of all that announcement was needed after a bad day of golf. I think I was at the lowest of low point on the 18th hole after a lot of shanking of shots. But yeah, I think it's something we're used to. I've always had a mantra, or always had a vision that I can't control anything that I can't control. Only control my variables, and anything that happens is kind of that I can control. Obviously it's on me. Anything else isn't really my issue. So I don't really worry about stuff that I'm not involved in. So it was one of those things that I knew it was going to come out on socials that day, but me, for the week before, getting up early and checking my phone every day, wasn't going to change it, because it was still only coming out at that day at 3:00. So I think it's a good mindset to have, is just kind of go with the flow, and no matter what came of that, whether it was a selection or it wasn't, we'd deal with it as and then and move on to the next.
Mate, and talk me through the selection process, because this was something I found fascinating on the day when you were explaining it to me. Obviously, with the Olympic Games, it's based on a tier system of how the nation perform and how the individual riders perform within that.
Yeah, so I think it normally confuses people that don't know the system, because it's such an individual sport. Well, it is an individual sport, but the selection criteria and how it works as your nation points is almost as a team. So it works off your top 3 point scorers. And after Australia World Cup this year, I got second on day one and Kai won day two. And after that weekend, it bumped us up into 2 Olympic spots, which was great. It means our nation had gone, I think, within the top 5 or 6 countries. So we're going to get 2 spots, which we were really happy about. And as the season went on, some pretty average results from the group and different nations, America and Holland outperforming us, meant that at the very last minute we dropped to having 1 spot, which wasn't ideal. Because you imagine you have 2 spots at the games. That means you have 2 riders and 1 reserve, so you have a team of 3 males going, which is better for everyone. It means you have 3 riders in training up to it. It means you've got 3 guys there. You've got a better chance of medals, haven't you? Where now with 1 rider and 1 reserve, you've only got 2 guys in the mix. So it was quite deflating, but like I said, what's done's done. We couldn't control that. We didn't do what we needed to do to get 2 spots, so it was one of them, park it and move on, and we're here today.
And the guy you are, mate, obviously, like, so cool, collected, like, control what you can control. You know, a buzzword at the minute, whether it's in sport, whether it's in business, is resilience. And I can imagine, you said it was deflating. How do you then stay motivated? How do you have that resilience to go, you know what, like, I've just gone from having 2 spots to actually maybe having to go as a reserve now. And I might not get to cycle. You get the experience, I get that. But what... At that point, you know, I guess that's when that side of sport that no one else really sees properly kicks in. Yeah,
I think I'd say I learnt the hard way. As I touched on before, I was quite successful as an amateur, and I had a great childhood. We had an amazing family, mum, dad and sister, and everything was perfect. Everything was smooth. I was performing as a kid. Like, there was never really a time in life that I went through great hardship. I never really struggled massively. Everything was kind of okay. So I think that when I came into the junior and elite ranks, I thought it was going to go the same way. And as a very naive 18-year-old, I can safely say it didn't. I got my head kicked in for a few years and was coming out in 30th, 40th, 50th positions in races instead of where I've always been used to. If I didn't win, it was a dreadful day. So I think I learned the hard way, and I had to learn that life's not always perfect and life is tough, and a great thing that I love doing is something me and my psychologist talk about, is zooming out. So when I've had a bad race and I think this is the end of the world, I've got second at a race, I should have won, look at it from a helicopter view of above and really dumb it down. I race 20-inch, arguably, kids' bikes for a living, and I haven't had a great race day. There's way worse stuff in the world going on, war, conflict, everything else, that makes my issue look about the size of an ant. So I think it's a great way of looking at it, is just take a minute, breathe and see. But it wasn't always like that. I did used to throw tantrums, so I can't say it's always been that way, but it's something I've nurtured and learned through hardship, I'd say.
Oh, mate, and you know what? It's like, hearing that is, you're saying it is one thing, but actually doing it, like, at the time, you know, in rugby, a team selection's like a massive thing. A loss on the weekend's a massive thing, but actually, like you say, in the grand scheme of things in the world,
yeah,
it's nothing, is it?
No, and I think what used to show me is when my dad's mum, when she was still alive, I used to love going back, and even after a dreadful weekend, I'd go back, and she'd always make me a cup of tea, and there'd be a biscuit there, and I'd be like, oh, it's all right, love, like, we go for the next one. And it was so refreshing. That's how my family are anyway, my friends, that in sport, business, whatever it is, you can get so caught up in your own bubble, and it is your world, so it is the biggest thing. But in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really matter. It is just business, it is just sport, it is just a hobby, so your life's not going to change. It's upsetting, but if you can get past that, I think that's a better way to do it.
Yeah, and mate, family's key for that, isn't it? Like, I noticed towards the end of my career, actually, as soon as I had kids, it was like I could switch off from a bad day's training or a bad result or a selection didn't go your way or whatever it was, and that's the beauty of family, and I guess the innocence of kids, they don't know, and they bring that energy. So, but mate, talking to kids, let's take it right back to when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I've got loads of mates, well, I say that, I'm not sure, but, like, none of them really ever picked up a bike. We all had BMXs, or we all had a mountain bike or whatever, but none of us were ever like, right, you know what, I want to get into this as a career and see how far I can take it as a sport. So how did that happen for you?
Yeah, so I think I was a very active kid anyway. I started riding a normal bike from, I think, the age of 3 or 4. And And we were always an active family, always out on bike rides. I played football, I did a bit of gymnastics, and I think it was around 2007 that my dad actually had a bad cycling accident on the way to work. He used to ride in and back every day. He ended up coming off his bike somehow, and he broke his neck, fractured his skull. He was in a pretty bad way. And a couple of weeks after that, we used to go up to the hospital on Preston's Park and Ride bus, basically. In his big old neck brace he used to wear, we looked out the window and we kind of saw the BMX track, and that's the first time we'd ever seen it, because we don't normally drive and you don't pay much attention. So it was like, oh, what's that? Anyway, a couple of weeks after, he took me down still in his big old neck brace, and that's when we first saw BMX.
I'm smiling about it when you call it a big old neck brace.
It was a big old thing.
But I'm presuming he's all right now.
He is, yeah. So, yeah, I think he spent about 8 or 9 months in that, which must have been absolutely horrible. But it is quite ironic that something that nearly and could have quite easily ruined his life or took it away was kind of what got me into the sport. So it is kind of a funny story in that sense. But yeah, went down, started to do club sessions. Then Father Christmas bought me a bike one year, which was great. Thanks to my dad, that was great. And then from then on, I won my first club race, started doing nationals, and within 4 years, I'd got fourth at my first World Championship. So it was quite a fast transition, I'd say.
So let's go to a day in the life of Ross Cullen. What's, not for you, it's obvious, it's normal. You've joined us from training today, but for everyone else, we've got no idea what you do, especially in an individual sport. So
I think the winter days are the better described ones, because that's when we're in that's when we're in the main bit of training, because it's off season. You can do as much work as you want. So I had a pretty strict regime this winter that I'd wake up maybe around, if training we have to leave pretty early, maybe 6 or 7 in the morning, I'd be straight into my ice bath outside, which I'll be breaking the ice off the top, which my dad joined me for this year, which was really good.
How long are we talking?
Depending on the degrees, I normally do a minute per degree, is my rule. So if it's 2 degrees, 2 minutes. If it's 5, I think it's just something I can base it off. And it means when it is pretty cold, you can get out there in a minute or 2, which is great. After that, go and get in a load of food. In winter, I normally try and consume quite a lot for any sports people out there, like upwards of 3,500 calories a day. And then now I'm back in Preston, I drive an hour to training. We'll probably do 2 or 3 hours in the gym, followed by a bit of lunch, maybe some treatment by the physios, and then we're on the bike for 3 hours before maybe a massage, getting some food there, driving on home, sticking on the Normatec compression boots or something like that to recover, and then going to bed, getting up and doing the same the next day. And not every day is like that. Obviously, we have days off, we have days of less intensity, but that's probably as thick as it gets in winter.
Is the majority of that training done at one place? I know with rugby, like we'd go in, we'd eat there and everything, but we'd from team meetings to weights to the team session, it was all done in one place. Cycling is an individual sport. Can you do stuff away from that training base, if you like?
Yeah, I think our base is British Cycling HQ in Manchester and the National Cycling Centre. So that's where we have our gym, we have our track, all our physios, the nutritionists, that's where everyone's based. But I do try and get at least one gym session a week at home, more for the mileage and how taxing it is. I know it seems only an hour drive, but if you're doing an hour drive there, an hour drive home for a 2-hour gym session, you've done as much travelling as you had lifting on that day. So I think recovery is key as well. So I try and do a little bit away, but it's not the same. As you'll know, the environment in your governing body's place, in your rugby club or in British Cycling's arena and gym is like no other. It's quite motivating.
Yeah, of course. And then how does that look when I say on competition day, I was going to say, but is it a competition day? Is it a competition weekend? What's the build up into that competition phase, if you like?
Yeah, so it depends where the race is, depends how early we'll go out there. So for example, if it's in America, we'll try and be there at least a week before. You normally have a practice session on the Friday, and then you have a race day Saturday, and then a totally different race day Sunday. So you have 2 opportunities every race meet to kind of go and get some redemption. So if Saturday doesn't go well, you have Sunday, which normally is pretty good. And it varies race to race, to be honest. It used to be quite serious and quite intense, but something we've worked on is keeping it relaxed and chilled, because in training, everyone's having a laugh, everyone's just going through the motions, and you perform really well. And we normally find that when we tighten up and when we try and switch on, performances actually sometimes drop a little bit. So the biggest difference now has been the races have been a little bit more chilled out and still professional, still to standard, but letting yourself have a bit of a breather.
And how does that link, you mentioned pressure earlier, and I guess competition day, it's all about pressure, and the guys, who are really at the top of the game can deal with pressure, and there's certain coping strategies that, loads of different high performance podcasts and psychologists will talk about. Have you got a way or a strategy that you cope with dealing with pressure on competition day?
Yeah, so I'd love to sit here and say I've got one that works and it's always worked, but it hasn't. This is something I've really struggled with from 2020 and onwards. I went to a lot of the races being one of the fastest guys, time-wise, data-wise, but was coming away with results that didn't reflect that. So it showed that if the physical performance was there, what was missing? So it was obviously the mental side. I've worked with multiple psychologists over the past few years. I've been into my podcasts and reading and studying the mind and finding what works for you. And I think after all these years, I've found something in the past 2 seasons that I've liked and I've locked onto, and it's just what I like to call a comfort blanket. It's something while I'm on the gate and all the pressure's on, you're in the final seconds before it drops in a World Cup final, you need something to relax you. So whether that's squeezing your hand on the bar, whether that's something you say to yourself, I like to find something. I know a few rugby players like to dig the toes in the boots or something like that before taking a kick. It all varies on what you do, and I think it works in general life. So there isn't a one formula, as you'll know. It's trial and error and finding something that you stick with.
Yeah, I mean, I remember us doing loads of stuff focused around breathing. Yeah. Actually, and the impact that can have. Is that something that you've touched on?
It's something that actually I'm looking at the minute, which funnily enough didn't come from any science people. It came from my dad. He's quite into sport and understands it very well, and he really wants me to get more into and focus more on my breathing. So I've been trialling some stuff this year, which it was more of I call it dad coaching. As a kid, your dad used to tell you something, you're like, oh, you don't know anything, Dad. Where now I'd like to think I respect and understand that he knows a lot more than I think he does. And we tried it at the World Cup this year, and it went absolutely great. So I said, you might not be as daft as I think. So I think there is a big impact and big benefits on breathing, how you breathe. I think it can make a big difference.
I know a guy, mate. If you need a guy, I know
there
breathing.
We go.
Sounds obvious that they're breathing.
Yeah. I've never really tried that. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating, mate. And then we touched on all those high points in your career, which have been amazing. Let's shift the focus a little bit. I know we've lightly touched on it, but if I had to say, Ross, tell me the lowest point, mate. That moment of adversity, if you like, and we touched on resilience when it came to obviously selection around Olympics, but like you said, life's not perfect, and you've experienced that as a youngster coming through. But in that full-on elite environment, is there one point where you've gone, actually, this is really testing me?
Yeah, and it was actually last year, before you mentioned there, the best performance of my elite career so far, which was the 2023 World Champs. Earlier on in that season, probably 2 or 3 months before, I'd come off the back of a AC joint tear in my shoulder, which was pretty rough, and I was struggling with a few issues with that, alongside not seeing many performances that year. There was a few things I was unhappy with that I was doing in training, and it all got too much. Mum and Dad flew to a World Cup in Papendal to watch me in Holland, which it was the first time Mum and Dad have actually been to a World Cup and watched me race. And I had my worst World Cup result I ever had. And it wasn't even like I could blame it on anyone else. I was just a shell of a man. And I'm quite open and honest to say I had my head in my hands, like absolutely bawling my eyes like after the race. And I'm not a crier. I couldn't tell you the last time I cried, probably then from now. And at that point it was, I couldn't see any future of me in the sport. It was like I was so locked into, I can't do this. That was dreadful. Let's just pack the bags and go home. And even the week after that it was pretty upsetting. But like I said, after talking to my great support network, they kind of got me round and said, look, let's just give it a try. And I got my head stuck down for a couple of months, took myself away to the south of France and did some training out there for a bit of a mental break. And came into the World Champs absolutely hauling. So it was kind of within 3 months, I went from, I'd say, the lowest I've ever been in sport and probably life I've had so far, to the highest of the mountain, the top of the peak, saying how great everything was.
Because it's a funny old game, innit? It can turn around so fast. Would you say that whole episode really was triggered by the injury?
I'd say so, but equally that was probably the height of my struggling to perform mentally. So even though I was injured and it was affecting my performance, it was more how I was dealing with it mentally that stopped me from performing that weekend. And it was just, it all built up into one thing and got blown out the water, and you've just got to deal with your emotions, I think, as an athlete, and that kind of showed me I couldn't have got that much better in a month or two. I couldn't have been the worst rider in the world and physically the sixth best in the world within 2 months. It was more my mental approach and how that changed was the key factor, I think, into that.
Motivation. Massive word, mate.
Big word.
Massive word. Purpose. You hear it all the time. What motivates you, what drives you to do what you do, whatever that may be. What is your motivation?
I think I've always been very motivated anyway. I think as a kid, some people would even say OCD, that no matter what I did, I wanted to do it to the best of my ability, whether it was making beans on toast as a 14-year-old or going to a race or making my bed in the morning. I've always been quite on it. But I'm going to throw something out of it. I think what I've come to learn is enjoyment. I think motivation's a very big word, and people try and get motivated for things like the gym or for business, or if it's not something you're interested in, that can be very hard to do. I think if it's something you enjoy and you look forward to getting out of bed in the morning and doing it, I think motivation covers itself off anyway. From my point of view, I don't know what you think, because obviously you've been in the sports world, now you're in business, you've done two things that you love doing. It'd be interesting to see how you find the changeover and if you're motivated for work or not.
I think you're 100% right there. You've got to believe in what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to love it to an extent. Now, I'm not saying I love, talking about finances or in mortgages and this and that, and that's why I don't do that. But the satisfaction comes of, doing a really good job for someone and knowing that it's going to benefit them down the line. Similarly with the beer for me, it's something that I love, and it's something that I really want to grow. And in sport, like you say, you love the game of rugby and you want to be your best. So I think linking it to your passion. And there's loads of extrinsic motivating factors, isn't there? There's, money and reward and all sorts of stuff. But I guess you've got to find that thing inside you, that intrinsic thing that really gets you going. So
because I think it comes and goes, doesn't it? Motivation comes and goes. You have days at training you're not motivated, and when that's not there, you need that hardship and determination behind that to carry on. Because if you didn't have that and you just rely on motivation, you're only going to train when you feel like it. You're only going to do work when you feel like it, which, let's be honest, is probably less than half the time. So I think I do like talking about motivation, but part of me is like, I think it's a cop out for some people. I think determination overrides that any day of the week.
Yeah, and I always think if you're in, you're in.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Get after it. It's on you, innit? So.
Yeah.
Let's talk about detail then next, because I find this interesting. And I noticed it more and more, especially as my career progressed. And I notice it in the business world now with our beer. It's huge. That level of detail, relates to everything. That 1%. People talk about 1%ers, and it really is about the finer details, especially in sport when everyone knows the details so well. They know the game plan, or they know the strategy. What would you say the 1%ers are? I guess for you personally, but for GB, British cycling, BMXing, what's that point of difference, or those real small fine details?
I think it changes, especially in the cycling world, athlete per athlete. For some athletes, for road and track, for example, that could be better kit, that could be a better bike, better bearings. Where I think in BMX there's that many variables that go on. I think the 1% for us is truly mindset, I believe. I've joked before that we could have the fastest bike, the fastest rolling bearings, the aero kit, everything. But if you're still not switched on and you're a tenth of a second late out the start, you're at the back of the pack. It's not, your margins you're working with are so narrow, most of it's going to be human error. But I heard something once that there's an Olympic gold medalist, Connor Fields. He does a little bit of a video. He's a BMX rider, and he said something which really opened my eyes, that a lot of people work on the 1%, but they don't focus on getting the 99% right. So, for example, you've seen my golf game. If I went out and bought the best golf clubs I could buy, the best shoes, Pro V1 balls, everything I could to make my golf game better, but but I didn't have any lessons and didn't focus on the bulk of it, I'm not going to be a better golfer. So I think people can get lost in the 1%, and sometimes it's down to just doing the work and focusing on that is right before you jump to the 1%.
So what I've took from that is, first and foremost, focus on yourself.
Yeah.
Focus on putting the work in, following the process. Mm-hmm. And then once you're at that point where actually the little bits can make a difference, but you got to get there first, right?
Of course, and there's no harm in doing them. I still focus on upgrading bearings on my bike, trying to get my wheels to run as free as you can, and getting the lightest parts, and trying to find kit that makes me feel better and is maybe a bit more aero than others. But equally, all that doesn't mean anything if I don't train as hard as I can every day and turn up on the day feeling ready. It's just pointless extras.
So let's talk about your biggest learning, mate. So, you've been in the sport, you're 23, but you've been in the sport a long time.
Yeah, a long old time.
There's loads to come, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But if you had to roll back the years, I would say 10 years ago, but you'd be 13.
Yeah.
But knowing everything you know now and everything you've learned, I guess this ties in together, and you're looking at a young Ross Cullen. Mm-hmm. What would you say is your biggest learning, and what piece of advice are you giving to that boy?
I think he's more to be patient. I remember there's a real good friend of mine, Andy, who used to race himself, and now he's not in the sport. And every time when I was getting my head kicked in, he'd always send me a simple message that, remember, cream always rises to the top. And at the time, I'm like, why is he sending me this after every race? And there was a few other people saying similar messages. And what I learned is that it is true, more time. I know not in every case, but if you do the right things and you work hard, things will progress and get better. In the moment, it's hard to see that, but I'd like to think I'm a bit better at looking at things in the long run now and not thinking, I had a bad training session today, that means I'm not going to be a world champion in 2 months. I think it's more of a session was bad today, but we can move forward. So I think it's more about being a bit more open and a little bit less selfish, I'd say.
Get your head down, work hard, appreciate that. People say money in the bank, don't they? But actually, it's not one session that makes a difference. It's continuous session after session after session.
I like to think of it as stacking bricks. You will have seen on Instagram loads that I think that a wall's not made out of one piece of concrete. It's multiple bricks stacked up. So if I treat every day of winter as stacking everything I do, every time I eat a good breakfast or recover well or eat well, that's another brick added to that pile. And by the time you get into season, you've got a big, strong wall of bricks there. Where if you're not doing them little things, you might have a little garden wall. I know it sounds daft, but it's a way that you can easily break it down and understand how mentally you can have that edge of being on the start line thinking, I've done everything I can all year. I've got no fears. I've got nothing to lose.
Yeah, it's linked to the process, isn't it? It's like you know what the outcome is, but actually sometimes people skip past what gets you there.
Yeah.
And I guess that it's nice because that's tied into the next question that I was going to ask you was, at 23, how long have you got left in the sport? What's next? What's the ambition? It could be an obvious question, the main goal, but not only what is it, what's the process to get you there, to take it to the next level?
Yes, I think it's just continuing what I'm doing. Even though BMX can be quite a youthful sport, I think the top guys I see at the minute are probably pushing on 30 or early 30s. So I could have another 10 years in it. And looking at this will be my second games at 23. LA, I could be 27. The one after, I could be 31. So I could get 4 games. And it dawned on me before that I could go at 30. 35 again, but that'd be pushing it. I think the eldest people in BMX at the minute are probably early 30s. You normally seem to kind of call it a day. I think your body's been through enough. But we've joked as a team that if there'd be anyone in the world to continue forever, it'd be me. They say I'm going to be riding till I'm 70 or 80. So I would like to get as many games in as I can. I think that'd be pretty special.
Amazing, mate. Amazing. And then obviously, you mentioned 35. I was 34 when I retired. It's no age, is it really?
No.
When you look at sport and real life. So I guess let's step away from the sport a little bit. I know you've got other interests now, but life after sport, you can call it, can be a daunting thing. It's a vulnerable time.
Yeah.
You want to prepare as best you can. Have you got concerns about that? Is it already in the back of your mind, or are you just, I'm focused on this and I'll deal with that when it comes?
And it is, I'll be honest, it's a massive worry that when people mention it, it never used to dawn on me as an 18-year-old. I'm thinking, why am I thinking about that? And I know I'm only 23, but I've seen people that I've been on the programme with since I started, have retired, have left, have exited the programme, and I've seen how hard it's been for them to go into something else. And not as simple as getting a job. Finding something they want to do, finding something they love. And we've been so locked in on BMX our whole lives and sport. Am I going to find something else that I love? Am I going to have opportunities and even financial worries? 35 is pretty young. If I went to be 35, it could be 30 for all I know. Financially, what position would that put me in? I need to try and find a job. I need to provide for if I have a family. And it is quite daunting. I know you will have been through all this yourself, but I'm a big believer in that I can create as many doors as I can, and hopefully there'll be more to step into and open through when I retire. Fingers crossed I'm not on the streets.
Mate, I think you'll be all right. I think we've spent enough time together now for me to see that, look, and I haven't got all the answers. I've been retired a year, so you figure it out as you go. But it's about being proactive. It's about meeting people. It's about taking opportunities and experiencing different things. Because, like you said, you don't know what you like.
No, and I think we've been so locked in. So I found a hobby of doing some content creation, some video work, and I've actually worked a few jobs. I was on one last night when you rang, actually. And it's kind of a win-win. It's a mental switch off for me, but it's also something to earn some extra money that can go towards the sport and what I love to do, and help me continue what I'm doing. So I'd say that I'd like to continue with that when I retire, but you never know. I might be sick of cameras by that age. I might want to do something else. So not golf, I don't think. I think my golf days are pretty done.
Well, mate, look, you've got loads of time to figure that out. This moment, this present, is the main thing, and you've got an exciting few months coming up, obviously over at the Olympics, and a bright future ahead, mate. So, look, that's a great insight. I can't thank you enough for joining us. I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to that as much as I've enjoyed chatting to you. Yeah,
no, thanks for having me on, mate, and it's been great to share an insight of a professional BMX and what I do day to day.
Legend. Top man.
Thank you, mate. Thank you.